After 6 years of war, Canadians are enjoying peace and the promise of prosperity. But the shadow of a new war is approaching. In September 1945, a man goes to the offices of the Ottawa Journal. More than 100 secret documents stuffed under his clothing reveal a spy ring has been operating in Canada. The night editor is confronted by a cipher clerk from the Soviet embassy named Igor Guzenko.
The first words he spoke were, "It's war. It's Russia." Well, that didn't ring a bell with me because World War II was over and we were not at war with Russia.
It takes 30 hours before Guzenko can convince anyone that his story is true and that he is in danger.
This is Matthew Halton of the CBC, speaking from London. Almost everybody's interested in the big spy story from Canada. There's a wild flood of wild rumors coming over the cables, mostly from Washington, as if somebody were trying to start a witch hunt.
5 months later, RCMP agents in Ottawa and Montreal seized 13 people suspected of giving information to Russia. Information that might even include the secret of the atom bomb. The suspects include civil servants, scientists, even a member of parliament. Eventually, 20 people are sent to trial. 9 are acquitted. Fred Rose, Canada's only communist MP, is convicted of spying for the Soviets. They will spend the rest of their lives under suspicion, their reputations tarnished. Igor Guzenko is given refuge in Canada. His revelations signal the beginning of another, very different war. And for Canada, geography will once again determine destiny. This is the story of a nation reborn through the dreams of a generation who sacrificed everything on the battlefields of the world. Of the dispossessed who come seeking freedom and fortune. Of a colony that becomes a province and completes a country. A time of plenty, not shared by all. And a peace burdened with dread. Out of the fires of one war, Canada will be caught in the icy grasp of another. It is the story of a nation caught between comfort and fear. For millions of European refugees, the Second World War is not yet over. They have lost jobs, homes, families, but not hope. They seek escape from devastation in Canada. Canada does not want Europe's dispossessed, but its farms and factories need cheap labor. Government officials prefer brawn to brains in filling bulk orders for workers. Refugees' hands are examined for calluses. Jan Zaremba spent the war in a German POW camp. Now he rescues his wife and children from Soviet-occupied Poland. He lies about his law degree to better their chance at freedom.
I had discovered that when one must get a job, higher education is definitely against one. I just wanted to look like a good, strong man who would do well any job I was given. I knew I could not be a lawyer.
George Luke, an Estonian engineer, and his wife Gertie are also seeking refuge for their family. For Gertie Luke, Canada is a land where there is no fear.
The greatest day of our lives was when George finally got a visa to Canada. You do not have to be afraid that someone will turn you into the authorities for something you might say.
In April 1948, the SS Marine Falcon leaves Germany for Halifax. On board are Jan and Alina Zaremba and their 2 children, Basha and Matja. Jan has been admitted to work in a Quebec textile mill. Alina as a domestic servant. Engineer George Luke comes to mine gold in northern Ontario. But for him, as with the other displaced people of Europe, the mere sight of Canada represents a miraculous escape from darkness.
I have a feeling I can do anything here. Anything can happen. It is a little like being a child with faith again.
But as Alina Zaremba discovers, there are obstacles for people Canadians brand as DPs.
What precisely do Canadians think DPs are? Sometimes I feel as though we were expected to be some new strange species. Sometimes I feel that people forget we did live quite normal, quite ordinary lives before the war. The biggest thing will be to be normal people again, to forget we are numbers, to forget we are DPs.
George Luke journeys on to the gold mines, but he is an untalented miner. When Gertie and his daughters join him a year later, George has a new job as a chemical engineer with Imperial Oil in Sarnia. Gertie becomes a doctor. Together, the Lukes build a new life as Canadians.
The best of it is, today, the bread we eat, we earn. We have left behind the DP status. We are free men in charge of our own lives. It is good to greet each new morning as individuals, as ordinary human beings.
Over the next 15 years, Canada admits 2 million people. 165,000 of them are displaced people. But not everyone is welcome. Despite the horrors of the concentration camps, half of all Canadians oppose any Jewish immigration to Canada. Few are admitted. In Canada, the war's end does not mean the promise of freedom to all of its citizens. Sashiko Ohata has spent a third of her life in a camp in British Columbia's interior. Although the war is over, the federal government will not allow Japanese Canadians to remain in British Columbia. They must choose either another relocation east of the Rockies or exile in Japan. Feeling betrayed by their country and fearing continued persecution, the Ohata family reluctantly makes its choice.
My mom and dad waited until the last possible minute before signing that form. They didn't want to go to Japan, especially Mother. None of us wanted to go.
More than 4,000 quit Canada. Most are Canadian citizens. The Ohatas join the last boatload of exiles sailing for Japan. At their ancestral home outside Hiroshima, they are shocked by the destruction and destitution. Sashiko's mother develops pleurisy and dies. For Sashiko, Japan is a foreign land. It will take her 10 years before she finally manages to return to the only place she has ever called home.
I had a tiny vanity case and kept packing and unpacking it. I had so few belongings. I really wanted to go back. At my farewell party, I started singing "Oh Canada." I remembered all the words. To get back, we did it all ourselves. Doesn't that mean that we really loved Canada?
In December of 1945, a former journalist, union organizer, and failed pig farmer named Joseph Robert Smallwood contemplates his uncertain future. A headline catches his eye that will change his life and the map of Canada forever. Great Britain, anxious to lighten its financial burden, is ready to restore self-government to its colony of Newfoundland.
We all love this land. It has a charm. It warms our hearts, go where we will. A charm, a magic, a mystical tug on our emotions that never dies. With all her faults, we love her.
In St. John's, Smallwood becomes a delegate to the convention debating Newfoundland's future. For most, there is only one choice: nationhood. Then Smallwood makes a startling proposal: union with Canada instead.
Under Confederation, we would be better off in pocket, in stomach, and in health. For the first time in Newfoundland's history, Newfoundland's people would have a chance to live.
The war has eased Newfoundland's poverty, but incomes are still only a third of those in Canada. Canada's new social programs could mean the difference between comfort and want. Many in the outport support Smallwood's call for union with the richer country. Fanny Ryan Fyander of Harbour Grace is not among them. The 60-year-old mother and poet leaves her sickbed to fight for independence.
I had to give my lip support to strengthen it, as it was temporarily paralyzed, but I persevered. No surrender. The freedom of our land comes before everything else. Newfoundland is still our own dear land, and we are, as yet, Newfoundlanders, and not Canadians.
Smallwood proposes a delegation be sent to Ottawa to discuss what financial assistance Canada might offer Newfoundland. Great Britain and Canada both fear the strategically placed Newfoundland could fall into American hands. They support Confederation. When Ottawa pledges financial help, Smallwood is elated. St. John's powerful merchant class is not. They fear union with Canada will reduce their power and their pocketbooks. Their leader, Peter Cashin, brands Smallwood a traitor.
I say to you that there is in operation at the present time a conspiracy to sell and I use the word sell advisedly, this country to the Dominion of Canada.
Newfoundlanders must decide their future, to remain a colony, become a nation, or join Canada. They choose nationhood, but not with a majority. They must vote again.
Don't vote Confederation, and that's my prayer to you. We owns the house we lives in, likewise our schooner too. But if you heed your small words, Canadian patois, you'll be always paying taxes to the tribe up in Ottawa.
Confederation's opponents have sentiment on their side. Smallwood has cash. He raises money through the advance sale of seats in the Canadian Senate. Canadian companies also provide generous donations. Towns, neighbors, families divide into hostile camps. Irish Catholics battle English Protestants. Outports versus St. John's. Smallwood tells Newfoundland they must choose between irrelevance and the 20th century.
We are not a nation. We are a medium-sized municipality. We can, of course, persist, a dot on the shore of North America. By our isolation, we have been left far behind in the march of time. The sport of historic misfortune, the Cinderella of empire.
Days before the second and deciding vote, Fanny Ryan Fyander makes a last appeal.
If self-government is the highest expression of our race, then what is the lowest expression of our race? Is it to deliberately scrap our Constitution for a mess of pottage? All eyes are on us. On July 22nd, the nations of the world will either deem us conquerors or cowardly.
On July 22, 1948, the voters of Newfoundland break Fanny Ryan Fyander's heart. Confederation wins with 52% of the vote. On March 31, 1949, Newfoundland officially joins Canada. There is celebration in the outports for Canada's newest province, and mourning in St. John's for their lost nation. On Parliament Hill, the ceremony in honor of the newly completed country is presided over by a new Prime Minister, Louis Saint-Laurent.
It is my hope and belief that in the future the advantages of the Union will be increasingly recognized by the great majority of the people of Newfoundland and of all Canada.
Joseph Robert Smallwood's future is no longer uncertain. He becomes the last father of Confederation and the new province's first premier. The tumult of war has unleashed a thirst for freedom. Quebec's rigidly conservative society is assailed by artists, intellectuals, and workers. A modern Quebec is emerging. Painters like Paul-Émile Bourdois embrace abstract expressionism, a celebration of spontaneity and emotion. A group of artists around Bourdois publish a manifesto called Refus Global. It is a revolt against Quebec's traditional values.
To hell with the holy water sprinkler and the French-Canadian tuque. The reign of our fear is over. Fear of prejudice, fear of public opinion, of persecution, of general disapproval, fear of the established order, fear of absurd laws, blue fear, red fear, white fear, so many links to our chains. Make way for magic. Make way for love.
The cry for change is greeted with scorn from the establishment. Bourtois is fired from his teaching position. He will leave Quebec forever. Workers, too, are demanding change. In 1949, the greatest challenge to the rule of Quebec's elites comes from the asbestos pits of the eastern townships. Rodolphe Hamel leads the mine workers' union.
People had always endured working conditions that bordered on slavery, and the favoring of English workers, who made up about 10% of the workforce. Everything was done in English. The English had all the best jobs. After that, French Canadians were hired as white Negroes to fill the gaps.
In February, 5,000 miners in the towns of Asbestos and Tetford mines walk out. They are demanding a wage increase of 15 cents an hour and protection from deadly asbestos dust. The American-owned company Johns Manville has an ally in the powerful and deeply conservative Premier of Quebec, Maurice Duplessis.
Le système d'une entreprise privée, qui est le seul qui convienne à nos aspirations.
Duplessis believes Quebec's prosperity rests on giving capitalists a free hand, no matter what their language. The strike becomes a rallying call for Quebec unionists and intellectuals. Gérard Pelletier is a reporter with Montreal's Le Devoir.
In the official ideology of the time, there was simply no place for the working class. Factory workers were seen as intruders. They had the bad taste to exist.
Pelletier meets an old friend, a fiery labor leader named Jean Marchand. They are joined by a third man.
I think, and decided it was time now to learn democracy from the grassroots. And
a 29-year-old lawyer named Pierre Elliott Trudeau. His presence is electrifying.
The striking miners nickname him Saint-Joseph, but when he took the floor at a meeting, they listened to him very attentively. He knew how to speak on matters of justice, democracy, and freedom in a way that was highly relevant to the situation.
Duplessis likes to boast that the province's bishops eat out of his hand. But some Catholic clergy defy him by taking up collections for impoverished strikers. On May 1st, 1949, the Archbishop of Montreal, Monsignor Joseph Charbonneau, delivers a fateful sermon. In the splendor of Notre Dame Basilica, he denounces the power of the capitalists.
When there is a conspiracy to crush the working class, the Church has a duty to intervene. We value people more than capital.
It is an astonishing break in the ranks of the ruling order. At Asbestos, strikers attack police when they try to bring strikebreakers into the blockaded mines. An enraged Premier Duplessis has had enough.
This is about an admitted attempt, encouraged from outside, to challenge and break the state's authority. That is intolerable.
He sends in his personal police force. 400 heavily armed provincial police arrive at daybreak. Some strikers seek refuge in a church, but there is no safety there. Others are rousted from their homes. Alphonse Valéard is taken and locked in a small room. When two policemen arrive, the interrogation begins.
I told them that the cops fired at us yesterday. One of them called me a liar. He pounces and curses me, hits me in the side of the mouth with his fist. While I was trying to protect my face, the other one hit me across the ribs with his nightstick.
Dozens of miners are brutally beaten. Others are arrested and jailed. Archbishop Charbonneau is forced to resign and spends the rest of his life as a hospital chaplain in Victoria, British Columbia. After 5 months, the strike ends with few gains for the miners. But Quebec's old order has been shaken. The seeds for a new era have been sown. On February 13, 1947, Imperial Oil drills a last-chance hole in a farmer's field near Edmonton. The company has drilled 133 holes in the west, all of them dry. If number 134 is dry as well, Imperial Oil will pull out of Canada.
That swooshing sound you just heard was the Imperial Oil Limited number 1 well at Leduc, Alberta, coming into production. The oil started flowing under its own pressure at 4 o'clock this afternoon, Thursday, February 13th, what may be a momentous occasion in the oil world. This is Al Yerxa of CJCA Edmonton.
A tide of oil transforms Alberta's economy, reshapes the nation, and changes the way Canadians live. By 1950, there is more oil exploration and development in Canada than anywhere else in the world. 30 years earlier, Frank McMahon had set out to make his fortune in oil and gas. Now he joins the scramble.
There's no doubt about it, we are in an oil boom. I've seen a few, but none as big as this one. We have Oklahomans, Texans, Californians, etc. by the bundle. All great people and full of enthusiasm.
McMahon becomes an oil baron and builds the first large gas pipeline in Canada. Canadian resources and American capital fuel an economic boom that seemed unthinkable just a decade earlier. Massive developments will change the Canadian landscape. The Camano Power Project in the northwestern corner of British Columbia is described as the 8th wonder of the world. The American magazine National Geographic gushes over its awesome revision of geography.
The Canadians dammed a river, ran it backwards through a mountain, dropped it down a man-made waterfall 16 times higher than Niagara, and then released it into the Pacific.
Buried deep within a mountain, the plant is designed to withstand nuclear attack. It powers the largest aluminum smelter in North America. A town called Kitimat is created in the British Columbia wilderness. Art Weens and his wife Pat arrived from Vancouver to work at the massive smelter.
The first morning, I took my bright new shining aluminum lunch bucket and put it under my arm. My wife saw me to the door. I kissed her, and then looked down Quail Street, and all down the street this was being repeated. Everyone had an identical house, an identical lunch bucket, and I'll swear, an identical wife.
But prosperity has its price. The dam floods over 350 square miles. It erases the traditional territory of the Cheslata people. Hunting and fishing lands, even burial grounds, vanish. Marvin Charlie is 8 years old when the water takes his home.
It was a nightmare for the people when they were asked to move immediately. The snow was pretty deep. Some of them took wagons and some of the boys took horses, so the traveling was very slow.
The evacuation is so sudden that those out on trap lines return to find their homes burned, destroyed, and flooded. As water from the dam tears apart the earth, the Cheslata discover, to their horror, the wooden coffins of their ancestors floating on top of the lake.
When we found the graves had been washed down the river, the people began walking the riverbanks, looking for their loved ones' graves they had lost.
40 years later, Marvin Charlie is chief of the Cheslata. They insist the signatures on the documents giving up the land were forged by federal government officials. Marvin Charlie negotiates $7 million in compensation for the forced removal. The decade after the war has brought prosperity to Canada, but not freedom from fear. The funeral train for former Prime Minister Mackenzie King leaves Toronto's Union Station. On board are Prime Minister Louis Saint-Laurent and the new Minister for External Affairs, Lester Pearson. The son of a small-town Ontario clergyman, Pearson has had a brilliant diplomatic career. Now he believes Canada should use its post-war stature to be an independent voice for international peace and goodwill.
We should promote the economic well-being of peoples and achieve social justice, thereby creating an overwhelming superiority of moral, material, and military force on the side of peace and progress.
The chill in the wartime alliance of capitalism and communism has hardened into a dangerous rift. As the Cold War locks Canada into the American orbit, Pearson's dream is threatened. Canada helps create a new military alliance, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. Pearson ensures the treaty includes social and economic aims, but the acerbic American Secretary of State Dean Acheson has little time for Pearson's idealism.
If you think that we are going to start all over again, especially with you moralistic, interfering Canadians, then you're crazy.
In 1950, a war in Korea tests the limits of Canada's influence. The communist North has invaded South Korea. The United Nations sends in troops under American command, including 27,000 Canadians. When the North Koreans are driven back, Pearson calls for a ceasefire. But he is brushed aside by the Americans who want to continue the war and crush the threat of communism. In a speech at the Empire Club in Toronto, Pearson betrays his frustration.
The days of relatively easy and automatic political relations with our neighbor are, I think, over. While we are most anxious to work with the United States and support her in the leadership she is giving to the free world, we are not willing to be merely an echo.
The United States expresses official concern over the remarks. Pearson's relationship with the Americans will never be the same.
The committee will come to order.
The Cold War is fought on many fronts. In the United States, Senator Joseph McCarthy's accusations destroy careers and ruin lives. The Red Scare is taking hold in Canada as well.
Everywhere are evidences of the continuous underground, cancerous movements of communism. Only eternal vigilance can protect us against communism and its infiltration into our way of life.
In Quebec, the padlock law allows police red squads to seal off any property where communist literature or activity is suspected. Danielle Dion is a Montreal wife and mother. She is also a communist.
When I saw 5 strapping provincial police enter my home, I experienced an instinctive moment of fear, but I quickly realized that there was nothing I could do but remain silent. They rummaged through drawers and bookcases, removing all the books. We had to change apartments a few times because of the raids.
Ottawa proceeds more discreetly. The RCMP quietly investigates tens of thousands of Canadians annually, seeking out political or sexual nonconformity. A Maclean's magazine columnist writes,
If a housewife in Ottawa hears a knock on her door, it can be one of only 2 people, the milkman or the RCMP.
In Ottawa, Pearson worries Canada is following in American footsteps.
Let us by all means remove the traitors from positions of trust. But in doing so, I hope we may never succumb to the black madness of the witch hunt.
When Pearson refuses to cooperate with America's anti-communist crusade, the powerful head of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, responds angrily to this impertinence.
Let me have a memo on what our files show on Pearson. Pearson had better stop mouthing his half-truths as they pertain to the FBI.
The FBI file on Pearson contains 243 pages and is labeled Espionage, Russian. An American newspaper calls him the most dangerous man in the English-speaking world. In October 1952, that most dangerous man is elected president of the UN General Assembly. But the American witch hunt will return for Lester Pearson. In 1949, Frank Colantonio arrives in Toronto with a cardboard suitcase. He stands in awe of a train station so massive it reminds him of a medieval cathedral. The 27-year-old farmer has left his southern Italian village to earn his living as a laborer in Canada. In the evening, he secures his future by learning English at a local public school.
I sometimes found it uncomfortable, sitting there in a classroom with grade 2 art projects decorating the walls and King George VI staring down at us. The chairs were designed for 8-year-olds, not for burly men just fresh from their jobs as hod carriers and carpenters. But it was the first step in learning a language that would eventually be almost everything to me in my working life.
Frank Colantonio is one of 120,000 Italians who will settle in Toronto over the next 15 years. Many find jobs in the city's booming construction industry.
Things were in a state of frenzied expansion. New subdivisions around the city fringes were being thrown up at a breathtaking pace. The pressure to produce was unbelievable.
Using new assembly line techniques, houses that took months to build now take days. But workers like Frank Colantonio pay the price.
Time-consuming and costly safety measures took a backseat to production, as workers routinely took chances with their lives. Anyone who objected could be easily replaced, and the fear of deportation always festered in the background.
By the mid-50s, Toronto is the fastest growing city on the continent. On September 14th, 1956, Frank and Irene Camiso and their 2 daughters are welcomed to their new home in Scarborough's Wishing Well Acres. It is the official celebration of the millionth house built in Canada since the end of the war. The Camisos are delighted with their new 3-bedroom bungalow.
Everything was just about the way we wanted it. Conventional layout, 6 rooms, and a wonderful heating system. Hot water on oil. No more coal shoveling.
Like many families, the Camisos leave the city for the suburbs. And, like many young mothers, Irene stays at home. After the war, women are not allowed to continue in their wartime jobs. Daycare centers are closed. They are branded a communist attempt to undermine the Canadian family. School boards and the Federal Civil Service will not hire married women. Some provincial governments fire any woman who is married.
La province de Québec a pourvu à l'établissement d'écoles ménagères spécialisées.
In Quebec, church-run instituts familiaux promote conservative traditions and try to produce the ideal wife.
Vider une volaille. Voilà le cauchemar de bien des jeunes mariés, mais pas ceux l'élève de l'école ménagère. Voyez comme l'opération paraît facile et même amusante quand on sait s'y prendre.
But women continue to work outside the home. Many have to if their families want a share of the post-war boom, a boom fed by a flood of products coming from south of the border. Winnipeg teenager Melinda McCracken is dazzled by the arrival of Ellet's, an American-style soda fountain.
America appeared to be the source of all good things. Things that were magical and ingenious and fun. Cokes, 13-inch hot dogs, sodas and milkshakes, soft ice cream, chocolate bars, comic books, Hollywood movies.
But on September 6th, 1952, Canadians see themselves in a whole new way.
Good evening. This is Lorne Green. This week, our cameramen all over the world went to get the news where and when it was happening.
Canada's first television network, the publicly funded Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, goes on the air.
Got my dance boots on, got my Sunday best, going to the barn dance tonight.
Variety shows like Don Messer's Jubilee. And drama series like The Plouffe Family celebrate the country's talent and diversity. For the first time, Canadians see their own country reflected back to them on television. But most of the drama and entertainment shows the CBC carries and English Canadians watch are American. Canada is pulled ever closer to her giant neighbor. By 1953, the United States and the Soviet Union both have the ultimate weapon of destruction. As the Cold War grows ever more dangerous, Canada struggles to maintain its independence. To warn of Soviet bombing attacks, the United States sets up chains of radar stations across Canada's far north. The growing American military presence on Canadian soil raises concerns. Prime Minister Louis Saint-Laurent warns Canadians.
We must leave no doubt about our active occupation and exercise of our sovereignty of these northern lands right up to the pole.
The far north is virtually uninhabited, but that is about to change. Families from Inuit communities on Hudson Bay find themselves part of a government experiment. Simeone Amagwalik is one of them.
They told us we had to leave. When the Kalunat or white men spoke, we were afraid of them. The white man was all-powerful, next to God actually, and you don't argue with him.
They are taken on a 6-week journey to Ellesmere and Cornwallis Islands, far above the Arctic Circle. The government wants to lessen their dependence on government relief and establish a presence in the far north. They arrive at a land known as the Arctic Desert, a land so harsh it was abandoned by the Inuit centuries ago. Now it is their home. Left with only tents and a few provisions, they must survive. Many are ill with tuberculosis. There are no schools, no medical care. John Amagwalik is 5 years old when his family is moved.
We spent years without mothers, without fathers, without brothers, without sisters, who were sick in southern hospitals. We were completely cut off from the world, no way of communicating with our families and friends back home. The first 10 years were the most terrible years of our lives.
It will be 2 decades before most return home. But in 1956, concern over Canada's place in the world will focus not so much on the north, but much further south. Egypt has seized the Suez Canal, a shipping route crucial to Britain and France. Despite American opposition, the 2 countries, along with Israel, launch attacks on Egypt. Egypt's ally, the Soviet Union, threatens to use nuclear weapons. The world is on the brink of war. The United Nations calls for a ceasefire. External Affairs Minister Lester Pearson proposes another crucial step.
Of an emergency international United Nations force to secure and supervise the cessation of hostilities.
In setting up the first truly international peacekeeping force, Lester Pearson has secured Canada's independent place on the world stage. But Pearson and Canada cannot escape the grasp of the Cold War. Herbert Norman, a brilliant scholar and ambassador to Egypt, has been branded a communist by a United States Senate subcommittee. Although he has been investigated and cleared twice, the stain remains.
You can't wash off the poison of a smear from your emotions. How can you fight back against this sort of thing?
In March 1957, Washington accuses him again, this time publicly. Pearson defends his colleague and friend.
These slanders and unsupported insinuations against him contained in this USA subcommittee report we can treat with the contempt they deserve.
The American subcommittee turns on Pearson and threatens to name him as a communist sympathizer. Pearson dares them to do it. The Americans back down. It is a triumph, made all the sweeter by the announcement that Pearson has won the Nobel Peace Prize for his role in the Suez Crisis. But triumph is about to be tempered by tragedy. Believing his name will never be cleared, Herbert Norman takes an elevator to the roof of the Wadi Anil building overlooking the River Nile.
The forces against me are too formidable, even for an innocent man. And it's better to go now than to live indefinitely pelted with mud, although so much of it will be quite incorrect and false. My loved ones will regret this act, but I believe they will understand the reasons for it. In utter humility, I beg their forgiveness.
Norman's suicide stirs anti-American feelings across the country. Pearson is outraged.
The sense of shock and grief that I feel at the loss of a colleague and an old friend is made all the more bitter by the circumstances of his passing. He was the victim of persecution.
Canadians are becoming uncomfortable with their government's close relationship with a very powerful America. They are growing angry. The country is ready for change. In the mid-50s, Canadians will feel the first tremors of a coming revolution. In Quebec, nationalism will awaken from its slumber and find new champions. A whirlwind from the west will sweep the country. Saskatchewan will launch the program that will become Canada's symbol of social justice. And Canada and the whole world will hang on the brink of nuclear war. In the mid-50s, most Canadians chase the American dream. In large cities, almost all households now have television. It's the golden age of the automobile. The most popular car is the Chevrolet Bel Air. It costs less than $2,000 and gets 20 miles to the gallon. For the first time, people spend more than they earn and are encouraged to do so. The baby boom peaks in 1959. Almost 500,000 babies are born in Canada. It will be the highest number of births ever in a single year. March 1955. In Montreal, a bitter winter drags on. But a very different storm is brewing. The Montreal Canadiens are battling for first place. Maurice Richard leads the scoring race by 2 points. There are only 4 games left in the regular season. On March 13th, Hal Laycoe of the Boston Bruins roughs up the Rocket.
He cut me in the mouth with his stick. I went after him. When I got to him, the linesman grabbed me. Laycoe was pounding me. I whipped around and hit the linesman.
NHL President Clarence Campbell decides the Canadian star must be punished.
It's a type of conduct that cannot be tolerated. Richard is suspended from playing in the remaining league and playoff games.
Without Richard, the Canadiens have virtually no chance of winning the Stanley Cup. The next evening, Campbell goes to the Forum as usual. The fans are ready for him. A riot spreads through downtown Montreal and lasts through the night. Only Richard can stop it.
I am sorry I can't be with my teammates for the playoffs. But I want to ask all fans not to cause any more trouble.
It works. Later, many try to fathom the real meaning of this explosion. Le Devoir's André Laurendeau thinks what's at stake runs very deep.
The crowd which vented its anger last Thursday night wasn't moved solely by its love for a sport or the feeling that one of its idols was treated unfairly. It was a frustrated people protesting against its fate. Thursday night, that fate was called Clarence Campbell, but he was only the embodiment of all the foes, real or imagined, that this little people has to face.
The established order is shaken, and new voices are about to be heard.
Well, it's 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready. Now go, cat, go, but don't you step on my blue suede
54 million people see Elvis Presley's first performance on television. Teachers and preachers are outraged. Parents are worried. The teens are driven wild.
It's funny, but the things parents don't like about Elvis are exactly what we like most about him.
We all think he's terrific. Yeah.
In April 1957, his first tour outside the United States brings him to Ottawa.
Elvis, you've watched people you've watched teenagers when they've been pretty excited. You've seen a lot of them. Have they lost a lot of their morals, or are they just the same as they've been lots of other times?
No, they haven't. They're growing up, you know, and they're having a nice time. And nobody's going to stop that. I mean, the only way they're going to stop that is for the United States to turn communist, and I don't think that'll ever happen.
That week, the principal of Notre Dame Convent, Sister St. John of the Rosary, takes steps to protect the moral health of her pupils.
I promise that I shall not take part in the reception accorded Elvis Presley. And I shall not be present at the program presented by him.
Louise Bowie is 15 years old. Like all the students, she signs the pledge, but Louise goes to the Elvis show along with 12,000 others.
Well, it's 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready now. Go, cat, go, but don't you step on my blues.
It was like, wow. Here was this person that I'd seen on television, and I was seeing this person in person. I'd never seen people behave that way, screaming and jumping up and down and pulling their hair, looking like they were swooning.
But now, she must face the consequences.
The next day, when I went to school, the nun who was my teacher asked who went, and I said I went. So she called me out into the hall, and she told me I was no longer welcomed at the school, and that my soul was condemned to hell. I was devastated.
7 other girls are expelled. It's the most humiliating moment of their young lives. But this is a new generation, and soon it will be clamoring for its share of power. The winds of change sometimes rise from the unlikeliest places. Prince Albert is a quiet prairie city, but here lives a visionary who will mesmerize Canadians. John Diefenbaker was born in Ontario, but he grew up in Saskatchewan. His mother's ancestors were Scots. His father, a teacher, was of German descent.
My father was an omnivorous reader. Any book that he felt we should have was secured. And the type of books that particularly appealed to me were books of history or biographies.
In 1910, the Diefenbaker family settles in Saskatoon. John studies and sells newspapers. That year, he meets Canada's Prime Minister, Sir Wilfrid Laurier.
I sold him a newspaper. We chatted about Canada. That afternoon, he included in his remarks a reference to my saying, "Sorry, Prime Minister, I can't waste any more time on you. I've got work to do."
Diefenbaker begins a brilliant career as a lawyer. But he is also seduced by politics. He arrives in Ottawa a prairie populist, a conservative MP who represents small-town Canada, taking on Bay Street and the Ottawa establishment. In 1946, Hugh R. Scott, a Saskatoon truck driver, shakes hands with John Diefenbaker. 8 years later, they meet again. Diefenbaker still remembers his name. They become fast friends.
John had such a speaking style that people were caught by him. He was a man of the people, and he was the spokesman for them.
Diefenbaker is not afraid to go against some of his own party's policies. He is one of the few conservatives to condemn the detention of Japanese Canadians during the Second World War. The party establishment, like MP Richard Bell, doesn't trust him.
I was concerned about what I would call temperamental weaknesses. His inclination to fight and to quarrel rather than to placate and mediate. I was concerned with his capacity to get along with people.
Twice, Diefenbaker runs for the leadership of the Conservative Party. Both times, he loses. But Diefenbaker is stubborn. His time will come. Canadians are ready for change, but the Liberal Party, having run the country for 20 years, is oblivious. C.D. Howe, the government's most powerful minister, launches one of the most ambitious and controversial projects of his long career. He wants to build a pipeline to bring Alberta's natural gas to Ontario and Quebec markets.
This may be the last big project I will be called upon to undertake. I believe this pipeline will make my children proud that their father had a hand in it.
Trans-Canada Pipelines, the consortium Howe chooses to build the line, is controlled by American interests. Many Canadians don't want to see such an important project in American hands. John Diefenbaker is one of them.
Mr. Howe says that we are anti-American. We are not. We are pro-Canadian.
Howe is unmoved.
The line will be built wholly within Canadian territory. The entire project is subject to Canadian law. In other words, whoever may own it, it is completely under Canadian control.
Parliament must approve the project within 2 weeks, or construction will be delayed by a year. The government invokes closure, an exceptional measure which cuts off debate. Diefenbaker is furious.
I ask why the members of this government found it necessary to muzzle the representatives of the people. Are they afraid of the truth?
The debate rages on for 2 weeks. Members of Parliament almost come to blows. But the pipeline is approved on schedule. M.J. Coldwell, leader of the CCF, is scathing.
The tactics of the government tonight have been those exactly followed by Hitler in the German Reichstag.
A few months later, Diefenbaker becomes leader of the Conservative Party. Hugh R. Scott knows why his friend won.
John was a fresh, vigorous man, and he symbolized change. His popularity was due to his ability to handle television. He was the first politician to ever have that ability. The country was ready for a change, and he was there.
Soon after, Diefenbaker gets unexpected help. Liberal businessman Walter Gordon issues a report on Canada's economic future.
The increase in United States investment in Canada has clearly resulted in a faster rate of economic growth. At the same time, it has led to United States residents acquiring a controlling interest in many of our largest and fastest growing industries.
The government rejects his findings. C.D. Howe is blunt.
Bullshit!
The Liberal government's confidence is unshakable. Prime Minister Louis Saint-Laurent has just turned 75. He calls an election, absolutely convinced of victory.
You think that there are others who would really provide a better approach to what your ideal of good human behavior in civilized society would be? It is not only your right, it is your duty to turn us out and put the better people in. And I don't know where you'll find them.
But Canadians seem to know exactly where to find them.
This is a time for greatness in Canada. The raising of a vision, catching something of the greatness of our past. For a nation without a past has little hope for a future.
On June 10, 1957, the Conservatives win enough seats to form a minority government. For the first time in 22 years, the Liberals are the opposition. For John Diefenbaker, it is vindication after 30 years of political struggle.
My fellow Canadians, the task to which you have called me is a challenge, not only to the mind and the imagination, but also to the heart.
A year later, Diefenbaker's Conservatives win the largest majority in Canadian history, defeating the Liberals, now led by Lester B. Pearson. But Diefenbaker's honeymoon will be short-lived.
For the first time
A live coast-to-coast France-Canada telecast. The microwave network...
On July 1st, 1958, the CBC and Radio-Canada join forces to make history.
We've got a problem here.
En fait, ça continuait comme ça pendant 1h30, ce serait pas un problème, ce serait une catastrophe.
The hosts are two stars of Canadian television, René Lévesque and Joyce Davidson.
This is to be the first live coast-to-coast show in Canada.
Aujourd'hui, c'est la première émission transcontinentale de la télévision canadienne d'un océan à l'autre.
TV is fostering two popular cultures, each with its own stars.
On va les essayer à la queue leu-leu, les deux langues, et puis après on fera comme les Nations Unies, s'il faut. Après tout, c'est ça qu'on est, deux nations unies. Alors, après vous, madame. Après vous, mais uniquement parce que c'est vous, pas parce que c'est en anglais.
Thank you, René.
Television has transformed the life of the Canadian family. In Ontario and Quebec, 4 out of every 5 households now have a set. In the Toronto area, 75% of viewers watch American stations. In Quebec, television sparks a cultural revolution. Juliette Gagnon remembers the first television sets in the small village of Saint-Pamphile.
People will get together at the general store or at a neighbor's because anyone who had a set had to be a bit wealthier. People would be invited to come and see this wonder. There were soap operas, The Ed Sullivan Show, current affair programs.
Journalist René Lévesque brings the world into Quebec's living rooms.
Voici René Lévesque. Bonsoir. Dans cette Algérie, vous avez 9 millions de musulmans, de gens qui ont la langue et la religion de Mahomet, et en face, ou à côté d'eux, vous avez 1 million d'Européens d'origine française, italienne ou espagnole.
A chain of events shows how powerful and essential television has become. In 1958, French producers go on strike. Radio-Canada's regular programming is disrupted. But on the English network, normal programming continues. Producers there do not join their French colleagues. Eric Koch is one of them.
They had no feeling for that they were our colleagues. The world was divided into the English and the French.
A labor dispute becomes a cultural battleground, but the Diefenbaker government does nothing. And André Laurendeau sees great dangers ahead.
Once again, we are faced with the tragedy of the French-Canadian milieu, which is not the master of its own institutions, and which, in times of crisis, does not find beyond its own members the solidarity on which the unity of Canada should rest. It would be unhealthy to maintain Quebec much longer in this atmosphere.
René Lévesque soon becomes one of the strike's leaders and an electrifying public speaker.
La seule chose qui est en jeu, c'est le droit d'association, le droit soi-disant sacré. Eh bien, ils ont pris la seule décision possible.
Within a month, the strike is a rallying point. 1,500 demonstrators march on Ottawa, on the same train for the same cause. Pierre Trudeau, René Lévesque, journalists Jean Sauvé and Pierre Bourgault. They meet with Labour Minister Michael Starr. It is René Lévesque's road to Damascus.
Starr didn't know what we were talking about. It was just the French network of the CBC which was shut down. So we came back with nothing. And we kept telling ourselves, if the English network in Toronto shut down, it would take less than 24 hours before Parliament would be mobilized. The government would step in, use the army if needed, to set things right.
Soon after, the strike turns violent. Many are arrested. Among them, René Lévesque. The strike lasts 68 days. By the end, it is seen by many as a fight between French and English. But Lévesque disagrees.
Vous accusez certainement de faire du nationalisme avec cette histoire-là.
On est obligé de s'attacher les 2 mains à certains moments pour pas perdre le nationalisme.
Until then, international politics had been René Lévesque's passion. Now, for the first time, he looks closer to home.
I had never really felt like a federalist, but neither did I feel anti-federalist until that moment. Laurando said to me, "You don't know it, but you are embarking on a political path that could lead you a long way."
Lévesque will soon launch a new career. Everywhere, Canada is being transformed. In 1959, one of the great engineering feats of the century alters the very geography of the country.
We can now see the symbolic barrier that has been placed across the locks. This is the barrier the Britannia will soon break. Here's the yacht about to come through. The St. Lawrence Seaway is now officially open. On the bridge of the Britannia, Her Majesty, the President and Prime Minister, and other guests of the royal couple wave to the crowds along the locks.
Large ocean-going ships can now sail to the western shores of the Great Lakes. The 2,400-mile shipping lane binds Canada closer to its American neighbor. For President Eisenhower, it's reason to be proud.
Side by side, we have grown up together. We have built nations out of vast stretches of virgin territory and transformed a wilderness into one of the most productive areas on earth.
Cette réalisation ouvre en premier lieu un nouveau chapitre de l'histoire de la Confédération en établissant de nouveaux liens entre les 2 principaux groupes ethniques dont la présence donne à la nation canadienne un caractère particulier.
It's a character that is changing rapidly. Even the Queen is caught up in it. Joyce Davidson has become one of Canada's best-known personalities.
Holiday party that will last for 10 days.
A few days before the Queen arrives, Dave Garraway of NBC asks her how she feels about the royal tour.
I think I feel the way most Canadians feel, indifferent. The average Canadian, I think, is pretty indifferent to this one.
If Joyce Davidson does not care for the Queen, that is her business, but she need not include everyone else and broadcast it.
And then instead of letting it go as a slip of the tongue by a beautiful but dumb girl from the sticks,
I was thoroughly disgusted when an irresponsible, rude, and ungracious girl presumed to speak for Canadians over a foreign TV network.
And there's more. The mayor of Toronto demands a public apology. People stone her house. Her children are threatened. But she will not apologize.
Can't sit there like a nebbish all of your life and spout inanities.
She leaves the country to pursue a career in the United States. But the controversy makes her the most newsworthy woman in Canada in 1959. A Gallup poll reveals she was right. 52% of Canadians were rather indifferent to the Queen's visit. The country will soon be searching for new national symbols.
On le répète partout dans la province, il est temps que ça change. Et ça va changer.
In the spring of 1958, people said of Jean Lesage that he was born under a lucky star. Maurice Duplessis has been Premier of Quebec for 14 years and is more powerful than ever.
Je vous le dis en toute franchise, que mes adversaires me décrient, qui me dénigrent, qui m'insultent, ça ne fait rien.
Duplessis is the embodiment of conservative values in Quebec, and his defeat seems unimaginable. Until Thursday, September 3rd, 1959. The Premier visits the Iron Ore Company in Shefferville. Suddenly, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he feels dizzy.
The life of Premier Maurice Duplessis of Quebec is nearing its end. We were informed this afternoon that his death is a matter of hours.
Duplessis dies 4 days later. In towns and villages like Saint-Pamphile, people mourn. Juliette Gagnon remembers how her father, a party organizer, felt.
My father was very sad. And he said to me, "My girl, he had a lot of faults, but the province has lost a great man. No one will ever replace him."
On pense également aux catholiques qu'il fut. Maurice Duplessis avait pris, dit-on, la résolution d'assister à la messe tous les mercredis. Et de tous les jours de la semaine, c'est celui-là qu'il avait choisi pour prendre ses décisions importantes.
It is the end of an era. Paul Sauvé could have carried the torch, but 3 months later, he too dies. And so it's Antonio Barrette, a premier without charisma, who calls elections in 1960. Jean Lesage is ecstatic.
Je suis extrêmement heureux que l'Union nationale ait enfin décidé de tenir des élections générales dans la province. Elles auront lieu le 22 juin et nous sommes prêts.
But in fact, the Liberals are not ready. They desperately need prestige candidates and court René Lévesque.
I remember discussing this with guys like Marchand, Pelletier, and others who were not available for various reasons. Among those of us who were approached, I was the only one free to go. So I went to see Lesage at his hotel and I said to him, "Well, there's one left, and here I am. Find me a riding if you feel it's worthwhile."
With Lévesque, Paul Gérin-Lajoie, and others, Lesage has a team.
Cette équipe de tonnerre que vous allez mettre à la direction de la province.
Lesage even makes headway in rural Quebec. Saint-Pamphile was, until now, a Union Nationale stronghold.
Mr. Lesage looked like a man who could do good things for the province. I voted for him, to my father's great displeasure.
But it isn't going to be easy.
L'Union nationale combat avec force pour conserver le pouvoir après 16 ans à la législature, dans la bataille la plus serrée depuis 1944. On vient de nous annoncer l'élection de René Lévesque dans Montréal-Laurier.
Notre majorité sera peut-être faible, mais c'est une victoire merveilleuse. C'est une victoire pour les jeunes, n'est-ce pas?
But the Liberals don't have a monopoly on change. At an inn in the Laurentians, 20 people create a new movement, the Rassemblement pour l'Indépendance Nationale. Its founding president is translator André Delmagne.
Qui est celui-là, l'établissement d'un pays indépendant, libre, souverain, au Canada français, c'est-à-dire au Québec, sur un territoire québécois.
Journalist Pierre Bourgault joins them. He becomes the RIN's most fiery spokesman.
I knew nothing about any of these things. For me, the idea of independence didn't exist. I was a nationalist, like most people at the time, because we were constantly put down by the English, mainly in Montreal, where everything was in English.
The following year, an Ottawa civil servant, Marcel Chaput, publishes Why I Am a Separatist. Independence is in the air. Now in cabinet, René Lévesque feels lonely in Quebec City. He tells his old friend Gérard Pelletier,
I miss chewing the fat with you, Laurendeau, Marchand, and Trudeau.
This leads to a series of friendly chats that will have historic consequences. For 2 years, these men will meet every 2 weeks, usually at Peltier's house on Elm Street in Westmount. It's here that Levesque outlines for the first time his big plans, the nationalization of Quebec's private power companies. Trudeau, opposed to all forms of nationalism, doesn't like it.
We are so far behind in education. Why use $300 million to invest in companies that are already working well?
They have never been close friends. Now they become political adversaries. Their fight will be a struggle of titans. In 1913, in Winnipeg, Tommy, a 9-year-old boy, overhears a frightening conversation. He has a bone disease, and a doctor is saying he might have to amputate his leg. His parents are poor Scottish immigrants. They can't afford the expensive treatment Tommy needs. Fortunately, another doctor will treat him for nothing. The boy retains the use of both legs, but it's a moment Tommy will never forget.
Surely the time has come in Saskatchewan, which has
46 years later, Tommy Douglas is the Premier of Saskatchewan.
Take this next great forward step and set up in the province of Saskatchewan a prepaid medical care program.
Most doctors are afraid they will lose income and their freedom. They react bitterly.
This is like asking the doctors if they would like to try a hanging, and if they didn't like it, it could be undone.
I think we all want a medical care plan, but don't we want one that's not dictated by a man that was a one-time Chicago University communist?
Medicare becomes the main issue of the 1960 provincial election campaign. The Liberals, led by Ross Thatcher, back the doctors and attack Douglas.
The socialists say, elect us, even with a 35% majority, and we'll ram a scheme down your throat.
Now, this sort of propaganda, in my opinion, is an insult to the intelligence of the people of Saskatchewan.
Douglas and the CCF win the election with an overwhelming majority. The following year, Medicare becomes law. The doctors still refuse to accept it, and on July 1st, 1962, when Medicare begins, they strike. Only 35 of the province's 725 doctors agree to practice under Medicare. Hospitals are forced to shut down.
We feel we cannot practice under state-controlled medicine. It seems to me the government has given us no choice but to leave.
What good is a medical care program without doctors?
I'm very glad that the plan has gone in, but I'm deeply concerned over the fact that my doctor left me and my 2 children without any proper medical care.
I have a family of 5 little girls. 1 girl is suffering from cerebral palsy. Where will I take my daughter? To Montreal? Will the government pay me transportation? Where will I go? Tell me.
But, sir, this is not the issue.
This is the issue. This is my issue. This is the people's issue.
The government sets out to find other doctors. Ted Tulchinski has just completed his internship. He's back home in Brantford, Ontario, packing his bags for study in England, when he hears about the strike.
The Medical Care Commission was recruiting doctors to set up an alternative service, basically to break the strike.
He supports the principle of Medicare and decides it's worth taking risks.
I canceled my trip to England. I'd already paid for the ticket. I phoned this commission guy and I said, I hear you need some help. He said, yes, bring your credentials. Take the next plane.
He is sent to Priestville, the town where a baby, Karl Derazov, died of meningitis on the first day of the strike.
I drove up there from Regina. They gave me a car. He said, well, here's a map. Go there and do your best. The atmosphere of violence was there. I kept a lead pipe under my bed.
But soon he begins to feel more comfortable. He writes to his brother and sister-in-law.
I was extremely impressed with the terrific quality of personality and strength of this grassroots Western farmer democracy. They're strongly for Medicare, and they're backing us up. The nurses at the hospital still resent us and stay loyal to the former doctors, but I think they will work with us. But we have to be very careful because the college is using smear tactics against us as intimidation. It's fairly possible I won't come out of here unscathed. But I wouldn't miss it for the world.
But many citizens support the striking doctors. During the second week, they hold a huge rally in Regina.
We are here to say that this is a bad law.
That same night, 2 men and a woman who had been at the rally show up at the Priestville hospital. They want someone to go to their farm to certify their mother's death. Ted Tulchinski is the one who has to go.
I was afraid, but there was nothing I could do. It was a lonely road. I followed them far out into the country, fearing this might turn out to be a rough ride. Well, there was an old lady who died. When I realized it was genuine, I figured I wasn't going to be bashed out in the boonies. After I certified the deceased, I was faced with this excruciating politeness by those who hated my presence, but knew I'd been there when they needed a doctor.
An agreement was signed between the government of Saskatchewan and the College of Physicians and Surgeons.
After 23 days, the doctors accept Medicare, and the time has come for Ted Tulchinski to leave Priestville.
Tension was very high there the day we left. Many people asked us to stay on, but we had to leave. The 2 doctors came back, opened their offices, and we turned the inpatients over to them the next day.
But he's fascinated by the West. He and some other doctors set up a clinic in Saskatoon. They also open a coffee house, the Louis Riel.
Light up, light up.
We had wonderful entertainment, and the students loved it, of course.
Moons up, nights up.
And Joni Mitchell came, and one of her first professional gigs was there. And I remember saying to somebody, "Hey, she's good."
And at the coffee house, he meets and falls in love with Joan Douglas.
Colors go flashing in time.
Soon after, he meets her father, Tommy Douglas, and naturally, they discuss Medicare.
Oh, Tommy knew it was the right thing to do. In his mind, medical care for all, or health care for all, is part of civilized life.
Within 10 years, the whole country will be covered by Medicare. Behind a veil of prosperity lies a monster, the fear of nuclear attack. Peggy Hope Simpson, a Halifax housewife with 4 children, can't sleep.
I was having nightmares of being in the water with my children, and I knew that I couldn't hold on to all of them. And I always would wake up in a sweat, just in terror.
The Diefenbaker government is also worried. In 1957, Canada joins NORAD, America's Continental Air Defense Plan. 2 years later, Diefenbaker makes a move that reverberates for decades. He abandons Canada's plan to have its own fighter jet. The experimental Avro Arrow, considered the best fighter plane of its day, is scrapped, and all test planes ordered destroyed.
When these aircraft would first be available in general for the RCAF, by that time, they would be ineffectual and inoperative.
Diefenbaker has agreed to deploy American Bomark missiles against the threat of nuclear attack, a job intended for the Arrow. But the Bomark is designed to carry a nuclear warhead. The public is deeply skeptical about the wisdom of Canada becoming a nuclear power. Toronto Star columnist Lotta Dempsey urges women to join together against nuclear weapons.
I have never met a woman anywhere who did not hate fighting and killing, the loss of husbands, the terrible tragedy of children dead, maimed, or left homeless and hungry. Here lies our strength.
Her idea catches fire. In 2 weeks, she gets 600 letters.
If you are going to scream loud and hard about the world situation right now, let me join you. But let us not scream alone. Let us urge the women of the world to join us.
With the greatest prize in the world at stake, their children, women see clearly the possibility of joining to fight for peace without being sidetracked by political, ideological, or religious differences.
A month later in Toronto, Voice of Women is born.
Many of our members, for example, are young mothers who have never joined anything before and who are now becoming vitally interested in world affairs through Voice of Women.
Marion Pearson, wife of the leader of the opposition, becomes an honorary member.
I'm indeed interested in Voice of Women. I think it's a most imaginative and worthwhile project.
Her husband, Lester B. Pearson, is leading the fight in Parliament against nuclear weapons in Canada.
I think it is both unnecessary and undesirable for Canada to become a nuclear power.
Voice of Women chapters spring up everywhere. Thérèse Casgrain, the longtime feminist crusader, carries the banner in Quebec.
Si le Canada est doté d'armements nucléaires, nous ne sommes plus considérés que comme un satellite de nos voisins du Sud. Cette décision est importante pour l'avenir de notre pays.
Peggy Hope Simpson helps launch the Voice of Women in Nova Scotia.
We were just ready to go. Someone said it was like mushrooms springing up across the country overnight. Everywhere, women just saying, okay, here's the agenda, let's get to it.
But by 1961, fear of a nuclear attack is teetering into public panic. Many cities conduct drills.
À l'occasion de l'exercice Tocsin, nous allons étudier le comportement d'une famille montréalaise et voir comment elle peut organiser sa survie pendant une attaque nucléaire.
The Diefenbaker government is under tremendous pressure to accept the warheads. That spring, the new American president, John F. Kennedy, comes to Ottawa.
Geography has made us neighbors. History has made us friends. And necessity has made us allies. We are allies. This is a partnership, not an empire.
The world seems to be hurtling towards the abyss. In October 1962, the United States reveals that the Soviet Union has secretly introduced offensive missiles into Cuba, only 90 miles from the American coast.
Unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island.
This is a time not for panic, but for calm resolve.
But External Affairs Minister Howard Green is much less sanguine.
Well, I can only say this, that we could be heading for a nuclear war.
President Kennedy orders all American forces on red alert and asks Canada to do the same. Diefenbaker delays for 2 days. But Canada's top military officials decide to follow the Americans without informing the Prime Minister.
All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, where they're found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back.
Boarding a foreign ship on the high seas would be an act of war. 2 Soviet ships carrying military supplies are heading for Cuba. The world holds its breath. Six days later, the ships turn back. The Soviets dismantle the missiles in Cuba. Nuclear war is averted. Thérèse Casgrain, the new national president of Voice of Women, writes,
"We have been a hair's breadth from war. Facing the ultimate crisis forces us to reevaluate what is important in life. What do I stand for?"
Women are once again galvanized into action. They go by the hundreds to Ottawa to demand that Diefenbaker refuse to arm the Beaumarks in Canada. Diefenbaker wavers. Then he announces that Canada will keep Beaumark missiles, but without their nuclear warheads. Diefenbaker's solution is untenable. He is ridiculed. It's like having a gun but no bullets. He is also accused of reneging on commitments to Canada's allies.
Canada has made certain commitments to the alliance.
Public opinion starts to shift.
Well, if the other countries have got Russia and them have them, I don't see why we shouldn't have them. Because
the shifting political climate brings a startling about-face. Lester Pearson now demands the government respect its commitments.
It can only do this by accepting nuclear warheads.
Peggy Hope Simpson can't believe it.
Oh, we'd invested a lot of trust in Pearson. I was very dismayed. Then I became angry and upset that he would do this. And then came this feeling of betrayal. That was a terribly bitter feeling.
Caught in the middle, Marion Pearson resigns from Voice of Women. Buffeted on all sides, the Diefenbaker government falls. The election campaign is fought on the issue of nuclear arms. In Montreal, Pierre Trudeau is approached to be a Liberal candidate, but he is outraged by Pearson's about-turn.
Le but ne doit pas être l'extension de la possession de ces armes, mais leur abolition avant qu'ils détruisent le monde. Lester V. Pearson, avant qu'il devienne, comme disait mon ami Vadeboncoeur, le défroqué de la paix.
He openly supports a new Democratic Party candidate. After a turbulent campaign, Pearson wins, but only with a minority. In the spring of 1963, Pearson meets Kennedy in Hyannisport. There, he agrees to nuclear weapons on Canadian soil. Nuclear weapons arrive in Canada on New Year's Eve.